What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the stream. Let me get some better music going here. There we go. Mute all the other things. All right, welcome to the stream. I'm Ian Douglas. I am the author of this website, techinterview.guide, and tonight we've got the generic Mike Chen hanging out with us. Mike is also a Twitch streamer and very active on Twitter, loves helping people get ready for tech interviewing and careers in the tech industry and so on. Hello to all the viewers. Got a couple people hanging out already. Drop a hello in chat. We got 3D Print Fan and Python Nate and Tech Dinosaur hanging out already. What's up, folks? Ian got a CTO on his show. He's stepping up his game. All right, yeah. Cool. So, Mike, let's start with a bit of an introduction. Tell us about you. Tell us about like how'd you get into tech? Let's start there, and we'll go through the progression of like how'd you get into coding and how'd you end up as a CTO? How did all that play out for you?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on the show, Ian.
For sure.
So I started learning how to code 13-ish years ago. I was graduated from school with a biochemistry degree, so I'm self-taught. Around 2008, 2009, started learning how to code. And back then, it was like just books, there no boot camps, no YouTube, no like Code Academy or anything like that. So just bought some books, read about Java, read about programming, design patterns and stuff like that. Eventually was able to land a job at a startup. So it was a really tiny startup. And in order to do that, I basically built some small projects in Java and took an unpaid internship to get a little bit of experience. The unpaid internship was Drupal. One of my least favorite working experiences was with Drupal. But it
That's
helped me
great.
land my first job, I think. So first job was PHP full stack. Yeah, sorry, I'll pause.
Oh
Any
no, I was
questions?
gonna say good old PHP back in the day. A lot of
Yeah.
Joomla, Drupal. I used a framework called E107 for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then of
Yep.
course like WordPress just rose to the top and took off from there.
Yep. Yeah. I was on. We were using a framework called Symfony at my first job.
Yep.
I think they're still around.
Symphony
But
with an F.
Laravel,
Yeah.
Symfony with an F. Yeah, Laravel's the king right now. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I started out at this 12 person company with 2 engineers, just me and my mentor, and then learned a bunch of stuff all across the stack, and then went to bigger companies, and eventually landed a job at Yahoo. And from there, I got noticed by Google, and so I went to Google for a bit, and Airbnb, and then back down to a startup. So I've
Nice.
been at the startup for about a year and a half. I was actually came on as a consultant, and I
That's
was
cool.
planning to just stay for like 3 months, help them out of a jam. Like their head of engineering had just left,
Mm.
and they needed help, and I was like, I'm gonna. My friend brought me in. She's a CTO,
Okay.
and I ended up really falling in love with the company and really liked what they're doing. So they're a very niche mental health company that called Motivo. It's motivohealth.com, and they essentially pair pre-licensed therapists with supervisors, which is a necessary step on the road to licensure.
Gotcha.
So it's a marketplace company that helps use tech to facilitate these connections, and really like what they're doing in the world, like essentially increasing access to affordable mental health for I guess America right now, but
Mm.
hopefully eventually more. So
Yeah.
that's
Fantastic.
me. And then yeah, when I got converted, they converted me as the CTO, and to full time,
Mhm.
and that's what I'm doing. And then I eventually became co-founder of the company.
Oh
So
wow. That's
just
definitely
really
a
increased my
step up.
buy-in. Yeah, yeah,
Definitely a step up from being coming in as a consultant and now you're like a founder of the company. That's pretty cool.
that's right.
We had who did we have? We had Martin McGovern and Sucha Parikh on the stream last summer, and we did a whole session on like let's normalize talking about mental health and tech, because let's be
Hmm.
honest, it's a grueling grind, and it wears down the best of the best on a mental
Yeah,
level on the regular, for sure. And I
for
think
sure. Yeah.
just being able to talk about it more, I think is a super big help. But just normalizing like, hey, it's okay to like not feel great about something, and you gotta go find someone to talk to, like totally all right. It's totally
Yep.
all right. So
Yeah.
that's cool. Um, the kind of what the company does kind of got me thinking a little bit like, do we have that for tech? Where you like can pair
Hmm.
up like, oh,
Yeah.
you want to, I mean, we don't have the idea of licensing in tech by any means, but to find like a more senior person that you can kind of mentor with and bounce things off of and whatever. We don't really have like a solid platform for that. I don't feel it's we got like all these other disparate platforms like, oh, just go hang out on Twitter and maybe someone will notice you there, or make lots of connections and build up your network on LinkedIn, and then like shout out from time to time like, oh, it'd be cool if I could find a mentor or something.
Yep.
But
Yeah. It's I mean, I don't know, like I don't know if I wish the licensure process on any other like industry. So the mental health licensure process like is incredibly hostile.
yeah.
It's like really really hard to get through. So supervision, I think normally takes like 200 hours, like 200 hours across like several years, and usually costs like 5 digits, I think, or like
Wow.
high 4 digits. So you pay out of pocket for the most part if you're kind of going it alone.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't wish those onerous requirements on the tech industry, but I also think that like you're right, there is no formal mentorship program outside of like, oh, join a company and hope that they
Yeah.
have a good mentorship program. Like
Right.
hope that they assign you a mentor and like that they're going to take care of you. It's crazy that that is like the way that most people get their start in tech is just like praying that their first company is going to help them, you know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jazz Codes for the follow. Thanks for following. Thanks for dropping in chat as well. Jazz Code says, thanks for doing this for those of us who will be in the job hunt in the near future. So, yeah,
Hi,
we're
Jazz.
absolutely, absolutely happy
I
to
think
help.
you're
Go
the
ahead.
same Jazz that I've talked to on Twitter, so it's nice to see you here too.
Yep, for sure. Awesome. So that was kind of your journey into tech and kind of got you to where you are now. And you've been really active in Twitter Spaces lately and getting into Twitter Spaces, talking about career prep and interview prep. I just don't trust Android enough to really participate too much in those Twitter Spaces. But tell me about like some of the Twitter Spaces you've been involved in and the kinds of like career prep and help that you do on Twitter for folks.
Yeah, I actually didn't like join Twitter to do interview prep, but I've kind of settled into it as the thing that I talk about a lot, which is also the thing that you talk about a lot. But I think at some point, I guess I realized that I'm really good at interviewing, and that's something that doesn't really say anything about me as an engineer in particular. Like I think those two things they're correlated, but not directly like the same thing at all. Um, and that's always kind of annoyed me about the tech industry is that you're disproportionately rewarded for your interviewing prowess.
Hmm.
And this is something that I really want to kind of like drive home to new folks is this is a really valuable skill that you need to kind of practice in isolation from the rest of your job. And so that's something I realized like maybe like halfway through my career. And I wish I maybe had realized this sooner. I think it would have changed my trajectory. Like I'm happy with the trajectory. Like I think few people can complain about such a trajectory, but I think it would have benefited me even more to just like buckle down and get good at it earlier on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So when Root user 1998, appreciate the subscription. Thanks so much. 2 month streak. Woohoo! Give you a little applause and a little blinky light in the background for that. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Um, when you were going for that startup and doing a consultancy, um, let's talk a little bit about like how the interview process has kind of changed from working at Yahoo, going to Google, and then going for like a consultancy type of role. What were those interviews like? Because I interviewed at Yahoo back in the day, but that was like 2006, like it was a long time ago. And I've
Yeah.
interviewed at Google and I've interviewed at companies started by Googlers, and those are intense.
Hmm.
What did you notice about kind of the pattern of what the interview process was like, and then going for this, sort of a consultant type of role? Like, um, what was that interview process like for you?
Yeah. So my first interview, or so yeah, at my very first interview, like, should I just start at the beginning?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So my very first interview was a very informal chat. And like this is one thing that I say quite often to people is like, don't look at me for like as an example of how you'd break into the industry today, because it's so different. Like back then, um, because there were no boot camps, I think the barrier to entry to like learning was so much higher.
Hmm.
And I think it's never been easier to learn how to program, but it's never been harder to break into tech. I think those
Hmm.
two
That's
things are
true.
like related.
Yeah.
Those two things are definitely related because once you lower the barrier to entry to learning, you have way more people, and it's harder to differentiate like who's actually like passionate about the field and who's actually talented. And so I always say that like my first interview process is not going to be your first interview process, so um but this is my third interview. I think the first two went really poorly, but the third one, I really clicked with the engineer that went on to be my mentor. And he didn't like, I think we did one coding problem, like we just talked like kind of at a high level about like MVC and technology and like what I thought about like different design patterns and things like that. But there wasn't even a whiteboard thing. Like we didn't even do like a technical question. He just kind of trusted me that
Hmm.
um, I would learn on the job, and that's you know
Interesting.
I'm sure that's really annoying to some people who are listening to this right now, because it's not like that right now.
No, for sure.
But that yeah, that's how it was. That's kind of how it was back then.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, kind of going into the Yahoo job, it was crazy hostile. Like
Hmm. Wow.
I felt at every question, the interviewer was just trying to feel smart and like outsmart me, rather than like actually assess my interviewing or actually assess my engineering capability. And so to prep for the Yahoo interview, I had done like a ton of cracking the coding interview.
Hmm.
That was the book that I studied from a lot
Right.
to kind of break into Yahoo, and it really mattered a lot. Because yeah, they asked me some question. Like I remember the question. It was multiply two numbers without the times operator. And then so I did that using like a loop, and then they're like, okay, now do it without a loop. That's still too slow. And
Wow.
so there was some stupid like bitwise trick that I
Yep.
had to do for that. Like it was like a trick. It was just like an aha thing that was just like a gotcha. And I like was getting somewhere, but I ran out of time, and like they called me back in for another callback interview. And then there was another question during my interview process where they asked it to me. I was like, how could anyone know the answer to this? And I looked it up later, and someone had written uh, a white paper on how to solve this problem.
It needed a
I
whole
can't I
white
can't remember.
paper.
Yes, that's right. Someone had done like a
Unbelievable.
PhD,
Wow.
like their PhD doctorate. No, not a doctorate on it, but like someone had written a paper on it.
Dang.
And I don't know, like it. I wanted to get into Fang, and so it felt like I did it anyway, but like I was really annoyed by that process. Yeah, it just felt really like not good to kind of go through
Yeah,
that. But
for sure.
yeah, so yeah, that was Yahoo. And then when I went to Google, um, it also felt hostile, but in different ways. Like everyone was so nice,
Hmm.
and the questions were a lot more practical, but there were so many of them. Like I remember when I talked to people at Google, I think I talked to like 20 people over the course of my interview process, and it took 6 months from the
Wow.
time the recruiter contacted me to the time I
What?
landed the job.
6 months?
Yeah, because it was like,
Dang.
yeah, the way it works at Google is you kind of pass the technical screen, and then they find you a team, and
Okay.
oftentimes finding the team takes forever, and you have to kind of
Interesting.
like not take any of their jobs and just pray that you get into it.
Wow.
um, but yeah, so I interviewed for a UX engineer role there, and that's the role that I ended up in. So I specialized in front end throughout the course of my early career, um, and the questions were a lot about like CSS specificity and like DOM manipulation. So I found them to be like pretty practical. There was one really hard data structures question that I remember. So there's always like one backend engineer like asking you something that it's like a cracking the coding interview style question, but
Right.
with like a twist. And so they
Hmm.
really test that you And in this case, it was like one of those types of questions, but where you have limited memory. Like
Uh,
you need to
like
calculate like an
mo-
infinite stream of numbers, but with limited memory.
modify the
Yeah,
array in place and that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like pretty stock question, but like they really try to test to make sure you understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was Google, and it took forever, but I really wanted to work there, and I wasn't like interviewing anywhere else, so I stuck through it, and I eventually landed that job. And then there were a couple other interviews. So after I left Google, I went to a company called Wealthfront, which I thought was really good interview process, very practical. Their interview question was like, bring your own laptop, code something. It's like a feature that I would expect to build at my company. So I did that, and then they had a question where it was like a decision making question. How do you make decisions? Like they gave me like a problem and like talk through the spec, and I was supposed to like reason through the trade-offs engineering wise and like design a system. And then that was it, and then like culture fit stuff. So
Yep.
I really liked that interview process. I felt like it had pretty good signal in terms of like what my actual job would be like.
Right.
But I think, yeah, like I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but like I think live coding is terrible. But they still had me do live coding. So yeah, so that's Wealthfront. I've been talking for like 10 minutes straight. I'll
It's all
pause if
good.
there's any other questions. Yeah,
It's all
I
good.
could tell you about my latest round of interviews as well.
Yeah, we'll do that next. I think there's always going to be some element of live code in the interview process, or some
Mhm.
demonstration of like whatever the role is. Like I've just been interviewing for a bunch of developer relations and developer advocacy type of roles, and there's typically not as much coding, but it might be like, hey, can you put a like technical talk together and show us how you would present, or how you'd build a little workshop, kind of thing. And to me, that's fun. Like I love putting that kind of stuff together.
Mhm.
That's why I want to do DevRel. And so for me, like I'm like, yeah, I'll put that together. One company they hit me up like Wednesday night, and they're like, yeah, if you want to like put together like a 10-12 minute video. They wanted me to deploy something on Docker, do a serverless architecture, and that was it. That's all they gave me. They're like, it could be whatever you want. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh great. I tweeted, I'm like, great. I'm gonna be up all night like with a billion ideas, and I'm like, I'm just gonna get up and start building something. And I actually recorded the video the next morning, and it was 25 minutes long, and I'm like, they wanted 10 to 12 minutes. And I sent a message to the recruiter going, my video came in a little longer than that. And I'm like, I gotta trim it down. I gotta not explain so much. And so I also realized the 25-minute video, my microphone was muted. Or no, what it was is I updated the Crisp plugin that I told you about, and
Yeah.
it like disconnected the Crisp microphone from the OBS broadcast software that I use. And so
Wow.
I'm in here and I'm talking and I think it's working, and I go back to listen to it later and it's just me. I'm like, oh
No
no, I gotta
way.
do it all over again. But it was good because doing it again, the video ended up being 15 minutes long. And I sent it to them that day. And they're like, was this something you already prepared? I'm like, no, I literally wrote this last night and I recorded the video today. And they're like, what? I'm like, okay, here's the thing. I said, I know that I'm taking a risk with this because like when you give someone a take-home assignment, you expect you're going to get back like really polished, like your very best
Mhm.
work. And I said, I've already sent you links of really polished work. I've sent you links of previous talks. I've sent you links of curriculum that I've written. I've sent you technical documentation that I've done. I've sent you blog posts. You've seen my stream. You've seen my YouTube channel. That's about as polished as I'm going to get. I wanted to show them this is what I can do to just, hey Ian, have you got an idea for like a draft of something that we can like sort of iterate on? And that's what I sent them, and they're like, we love it, and they made me a job offer the next day.
That's awesome.
And so it doesn't like, that definitely comes with a healthy dose of privilege because I'd already sent them all the other material ahead of
Mhm.
time. But I knew there was a risky move. I'm like, are they gonna like look at the crap that this guy just made? Like, forget it, we don't want to hire him. But they turned around, they made me an offer. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. Just want to catch up on chat here. We got some new follows. Um, Theodorus, welcome. First time chat. Thanks for the follow. Appreciate that. MEB says Michael Chen, stop following me. Um, and yes, we are live, DG. Oh, I see you're catching up in chat too, Anch. Good to see you in chat too. Hello, hello. So we'll throw out a quick applause and blinky lights for the new follows. Appreciate that. Just a little Python script I wrote. Love doing goofy little things like that. So you've talked about your interview process getting into like Fang level companies. What was that interview process like then when you were leaving Fang to become a consultant for the startup that you're at now? Like, was it very different? Like, did you already know the people there? Like, what was that sort of relationship between you and the people in the business, and what was that interview process like?
Yeah, I'll make one more quick note. When I joined Airbnb, I interviewed at 8 companies.
Wow,
And I got 7 offers. And
dang,
like basically the thing that changed my perspective on this was I saw my friend doing something similar where he went out and got like a bunch of offers and ignited a bidding war and got an insane like what I viewed as an insane salary.
mm,
And coming out of Wealthfront, I did the same thing and it tripled my total comp.
wow,
So yeah, and I went into my Airbnb, the initial offer. I think I increased it like 45% over the original offer by just leveraging a bunch of
wow,
offers together. So when I talk about like this is a valuable skill set, like yeah, I wouldn't have done that if I had only gone to Airbnb and been like, "Hello, can you give me a job?" and then just like done one interview, which to date had been what I was doing.
right.
So that is just a really bad way to do it. And if you do that, if you do the multiple offers thing every time, like I could have probably gotten a way higher salary like than
Mm,
than I ended up with. So I highly recommend doing that. And the way I just did it, like I just grinded out like Pramp and like interview, or I can't even remember what I was using back then. But it was like all these like mock interview
mhm,
things where you pair up with someone else, and
right.
like I did it with my friends my friend I was talking about who's really good at interviewing as well. So um just like practice, practice, practice.
For sure.
And again, it's like only loosely correlated with how good I am as an engineer, but such a valuable skill.
Yeah. And that's the key thing. Like practicing mock interviews is fine, but you have to practice with somebody that can actually give you quality feedback about how you did. Because like I could just go find my dog. He's not down here at the moment, but like I could go
Yep.
find my dog and like bounce technical questions and answers and whatever, and he's just gonna look at me and go, huh?
Yep. Yep.
Like I'm not gonna get feedback from my dog. I could talk to, my kids, my wife. They're not gonna give me quality feedback, and so am I really gonna get better? Well, I mean, you will get better at how you explain things because you do it over and over and over and over again, and that will definitely help. Like when I got through these last couple of rounds of interviews with companies and they're like, "Tell me about yourself, tell me why you want this job." Like those are all kind of the same question. Like why should we hire
Hmm.
you? They're all really asking the same thing. Like give me all the pertinent details about you, about this job, like why we should continue to move forward in the process. And because I had started interviewing back in November and into December, and then I did a couple like right around the holidays, by the time I got to these interviews over the last 2 weeks, I had that polished and down. It's like, in the, back in November and December, I was probably telling that story like a Quentin Tarantino movie where it starts in the present, jumps to the future, jumps to the past, jumps back to the future, jumps to the present, back to the past, and you're kind of all over the place. But by the time I got to these last couple of interviews where I got all of these offers, it was a very chronological, like, this is me, this is what you need to know. And they're like, that's great. Because I had it polished, I had it practiced, I was figuring out what was working and what wasn't working. And I also have like a little digital audio recorder thing that I use where I record my own interviews and I go back and listen to them later on. It's like, ugh, like I really need to rephrase how I do that thing. And so having practice is good. And I was actually chatting with a mentee earlier today, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to practice to get better." I'm like, "Yeah, practice makes better. I never say practice makes perfect because you'll never be perfect at interviewing, but it will make you faster at how you present your content. You'll be more concise. You won't be so wordy. And a lot of it's just the practice and the repetition to where it doesn't sound like I'm reading something off a script on my screen. It's going to flow very naturally of like, yeah, let me tell you all about you and what makes me tick, and it just comes across way more naturally. You end up sort of not promoting is the wrong word, but you're sort of presenting that with a lot more confidence because you've practiced it and you've polished it. And I think a lot of things are that way in the interview. Now, going back to one point that you made, you interviewed at 8 companies, got 7 offers. A lot of folks hanging out in chat, they're struggling to get an interview. much
Yep.
less get through several companies and several offers. I mean, that's kind of the dream for all of us is to have multiple offers to juggle, and I'm juggling the last two myself right now. Um,
Yep.
what would you suggest to people that are trying to get into tech? Because that first job in tech is awful. Like trying to get that
Yes.
first job stinks.
Yeah.
What would you
Yep.
recommend to newcomers? How do they stand out? How would they even get noticed? Why do you think companies don't even take a chance on entry level devs? I know that's like 15 questions in one, so feel free to pick
Yeah.
that apart and go.
Yeah. I
Mike's
looking at the
hogging them
chat here.
jobs.
Yeah, I'm hogging them jobs. No, I think I think part of the issue, which I think is hard to admit, is like there are a lot of boot camps out there that I think are back when I was so Wealthfront. I'll rewind it a little bit to my time at Wealthfront. At Wealthfront, almost my entire team was comprised of boot camp grads.
Mm,
And there were only three like major ones at the time: Dev Bootcamp, Hack Reactor, and App Academy.
yep.
And they're all pretty reputable. Like they all turned out like really high quality candidates for jobs and stuff like that. And they ended up my teammates ended up being incredibly talented engineers. And what I think we've seen in the industry is like kind of a flooding of the market,
Mm,
if you will, with the volume of boot camps that are out there. Which is not to say that there's not like very talented engineers coming from them. It's really hard for companies now to discern what's good and what's not, and many companies just aren't even trying anymore.
right.
I think like that's one issue. And then on the other side of it, now that we've gone remote, I think companies are unable to kind of handle that mentorship process, and they're not willing to try. And so a lot of
Mm,
companies are hiring senior mid-level to senior devs for like a 50 to 100% markup over
yeah.
what they're doing it for like last year. And that's how unwilling companies are to like figure out how to mentor people properly, which is a little bit shocking to me that like no one's figured out that this is going to be a problem in like 2 years from now.
Yeah. And
Oh,
there are a lot more boot camps like you mentioned, and the quality of them I think isn't necessarily there for some. Some
yeah,
are like super high quality.
yep,
Um, and I think that a lot of it comes down to the trust from the company around like,
yep,
yeah, you went to like Uncle Jim's, code
yep,
camp kind of things. Like, I don't know what that program is. Do I trust it? Do I not? Where like a big name like a Galvanize or a Dev Boot Camp or Turing or
yep,
something like that, it's like, okay, we know your curriculum, we've seen your grads, they're great, like, and I think companies are a lot more willing to take that chance. One thing I wish companies would do is recognize like, hey, if we bring on this entry level dev, we get to shape and mold them into what we want our engineering team to be, and now we can use them as an example of like, hey, everybody, be like Mike. This is what we want you to do. This is the
yep,
process we want you to follow. These are the skills that we want you to have, and show that we're willing to invest back in you and train you and mentor you. Because, like you said, that mentorship should happen kind of organically no matter what. Um, but I wish more companies would take that chance. And I think a lot of companies are like, oh, millions and millions of unclaimed, tech jobs or whatever, but they're only looking for senior level developers. It's
yep,
like, well, yeah, there aren't that many senior developers. There are that many developers, but they're not going to be senior level. And if you only look for senior level talent, you're only going to get people that bounce back and forth from company to company. You need to work on retention and training internally and help make those people better and make them what you want them to be. So,
yeah, yeah. It's I think it's hard. Like being on the other side of the table, I totally understand like where people are coming from
yeah,
in terms of like um, one of the problems that my company's facing is that we are very early stage, and
right.
we can take a chance on junior devs. And I recently hired a junior developer, but the problem is also like I don't know what she's gonna do when I train her up. Is she gonna
Mm,
stay, or is she gonna leave to like get like a 50% pay bump? Because I honestly like
hmm
I cannot compete with that,
Yep,
and
for sure.
so that's something that gnaws in the back of my mind is like that feels like a pretty intractable problem, like
Yeah.
kind of that mismatch of like what a company that is positioned to hire junior developers can offer
hmm
in terms of salary to like compete on the market,
Right.
once that junior becomes a mid-level, and that's hard for me because I also believe very strongly in like paying people what they're worth. And the
Right.
market says this person's worth this much, then this person's worth that much, right?
Right.
So, but I just like can't pay market rate sometimes. So this is
Yeah,
this is
for
kind of
sure.
like a struggle that I find myself in all the time.
There's a funny story that I heard, and it was meant to be like one of those amusing anecdotal, hypothetical kinds of things, of like a CFO trying to argue with the CEO about whether they should pay for employee training, and the CFO says, "What if we train them and they leave?" And the CEO says, "What if we don't train them and they stay?"
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I think yes, it can inspire a little bit of loyalty from the employee if the company says like, "Hey, like we want to like give you this training. We know it's going to make you a better developer. We hope that that is going to make you stay here." But I think at the end of the day, if you really care about them as a developer and their progress, is it just that they're leaving for the pay bump, or are they leaving for some other kind of opportunity, especially for an entry level dev? Like entry level devs don't always know what they want to do with their career.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so that first job, second job, even the third job, they might still be figuring out like, do I want to do this kind of development? Do I want to do that kind of development? And they're still kind of like feeling that out a little bit before deciding, okay, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to go in that direction. Um, and so I think it can be a little bit hard retaining entry level talent just because they're a little scattered, or they get
Hmm.
distracted by the shiny, and they're like, oh, I want to go take that job because that job is cooler. It's like, well, we could have made that opportunity for you here if you communicate it. And so
Yeah.
there's a bit of trust there, but I get where you're coming from too. Like, there's I saw back and forth on Twitter. I think it was last night or this morning, and they were talking about like, people leaving companies to go get
Hmm.
that job, or as someone said in chat, like, go get that bag. Um, you want to go get that job, get that raise. Excuse me, that there's a reason that companies call them, they have recruiting teams, but they don't have like retention teams.
Hmm.
Like there's no team focusing on retention. There's only a team focusing on like recruit new people into the company, but not about let's keep them here. And I wonder if that's maybe where there's some disconnect in the corporate world of how do we keep the people we have? And yeah, maybe you can't afford that 50% pay bump, but if you can make those opportunities and say like, hey, we're doing what we can, or we'll give you some extra equity or something, but we really want to keep you here because we got all this domain knowledge. But I think a lot of it starts with just the trust of communication of what do you want on, like, as a developer on my team? What do you want? What inspires you? What motivates you? What are you looking at out in the real world besides salaries and the dollar bills alone? Like, what do you want to be doing? It's my job as your manager to make that opportunity available if I can. It's not always possible. And if it's not possible,
Yeah.
I'm going to do everything I can to introduce you to anybody I know that's, you know, going to get you into that other kind of role or that other kind of industry because I care about the people on my team as people.
Hmm.
Yes, it would be great if I could retain everybody on my team, but I want to do what's best for you as an individual. And a lot of managers don't think that way because a lot of
Yeah.
managers, they have the responsibility to the business of no, we have to keep everybody here. We need to hire as many people for as few dollars as possible, and get this work done. We got deadlines to hit, and we got whatever. And I think that there's too much of a disconnect from the business responsibility and the person responsibility of taking care of the team. And I
Yeah.
think that then can lead to retention problems. But I think it really
Yeah. I
starts
mean,
with communication too.
yeah. I mean, like that's something I about too is like, what are the other levers I can pull in order to like, make and when I think about retention, I always think about um what how can I like so when I think about retention, I don't think about it in the sense of like you owe me. Like I think
Yeah.
that's bad. Like people like I think companies do that. They play that card of like, we took a chance on you. We brought you in, we trained you up, you owe us.
Right.
And that is really toxic. Like I think that's never the thing that I want to like that's never the lever I want to pull to try and retain someone. Um like I always view people staying at my company as they think this is the best fit for where they are in their career. Like
Right.
that's like really how I think about it. It's just so hard if it's like they're trained up by now, they're mid-level and they're looking at a 50 to 75% pay bump.
For sure.
Like it's not there's just not that many levers you could pull in order
Yeah.
to keep, and like, maybe like some other great perks that like my company doesn't offer right now,
Right.
because we can't afford to. And it's
Right.
like, yeah, so I haven't, it hasn't happened yet, so it's like still pretty abstract to me right now. But I'm dreading the day when I have to figure this out. Like I'm figuring it out as I go along, because yeah, it is about like how do I make this the best place for you
Yeah.
personally, and how do I make this job the best fit for you. So
Yeah. For
um,
sure.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah. Cool. Let's rewind and chat. We had a bunch of comments and questions kind of dropping in. Creature Next said a little while ago, I've felt less confident since I've started applying after making it to the interview stage a few times and then being told that some other interviewee is just better than me. Yeah, and that's part of our job as interviewers is to find out your level of skill and then figure out whether that fits in on the team. One of these jobs that I thought I was going to get an offer from, they called me today and they're like, "Yeah, no offer." It's like, okay, I get it. I didn't have the level of skill. At the same time, they also didn't offer like, "Hey, could we offer you this other kind of role?" Like they said, "Oh yeah, everybody on the team really enjoyed talking to you. They thought you had all kinds of really great skill. You just didn't have enough skill in the area where we wanted to bring you on for that developer relations role." And I'm like, "I get it. I totally understand." But at the same time, it wasn't like, "Oh, we have this other role if you want to like consider that." But I have had that in other jobs and other interviews recently where they're like, "Hey, it didn't work out with that team. Do you want to go interview with this team?" That's happened a couple of times, and it's nice because then you've really connected with the company at that point. That they want to retain you even as a candidate to like see what else they can find. And then there was a little bit of chat about rejections and things like that. Welcome to the new followers, Elise and Meticulous Viewer. Give you some blinky lights and some applause for that. Welcome. And RC Maniac says, my last company had an issue occur that it prompted HR to visit the office. They explained what they were doing to make something better. During question and answer, someone asked about salary. They said they offer competitive salary. I asked why they don't give everybody raises so our salary remains competitive to prevent people from leaving. Yeah, so my job when I was teaching at Turing, the guy that runs Turing, his philosophy is if you're going to leave to go get that 10, 15% bump, I'm going to give you that bump and I'm going to give it to you throughout the year. I'm not going to wait for an anniversary date. I'm going to do it at the end of every quarter, every like class cycle, which was like every 7 or 8 weeks. So it was more frequent than every quarter. But at the end of that 7, 8 week period, we all got like a 1 or 2% raise to keep us there. And so we didn't have to wait a full year to see that raise. We always had that raise coming in like every 2 months. And I'm like, holy cow, I wish more companies would think that way. Because you see these companies that are like, oh yeah, let's do profit share and we'll give you like some bonus as part of your profit share. It's like, just give me that as a raise,
Yeah.
like instead of just like hand out cash from time to time, it's like just put that on my paycheck on the regular. Like, it's an interesting way to think about it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of FANG companies, they do give pretty hefty raises when you get promoted. But man, do you have to work for it. You have to
For
work
sure.
so hard for that promotion. I remember I got promoted from a junior to mid level at Google, and I was putting together my promotion packet. What you have to do, like basically, what you do is you put all your achievements into this like written document, and you send that to a faceless committee,
Wow.
and they review it. And it took me like 60 hours, I think, to put that together for just a junior to mid level. And I got denied. Oh, I think I got denied once.
Hmm.
And then I had to wait 6 months to do it again.
Wow.
And that is the process. And they gave me like a 27% pay bump. And then I like left Google the next year and I got like a 40% pay bump or something like that. So it's just like
Yeah.
I could go through this grueling process again, and that's like even worse than the first time, or I could just leave and just be good at interviewing and
Yeah.
for like a week
I believe it.
and be done with it, like and have a much higher salary. It's just like that's and I've heard stories too of people like they will leave and go to like Facebook
Yeah.
at as the next level. They'll get promoted through their interview
Right. Right.
process. They'll get hired in the next level, and then they'll come back to Google as that level, like
Mm-hmm.
easier than getting promoted.
Yep. I believe it.
Um, Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean,
I
when
don't know why companies like make you jump through these hoops instead of like this is one thing that I think about a lot is like I want to, and this won't scale. This is
Mhm.
like I think one of the problems is like Google's 100,000. I don't know how many engineers they have. Um, this approach won't scale, but like I'd rather just acknowledge that you're doing good work and give you a raise when I think you deserve a raise,
Right.
and rather than make you like beg for it. I think it's
Mhm.
just so
For sure.
stupid that it's so short-sighted that companies do this. And like it's just I think most companies just view it as like, oh, people will leave and that's just the cost of doing business, rather
I
than like
mean,
figuring out like how can we avoid this.
that's why Amazon changed their equity structure. A lot of companies are like, "Oh, we'll dish out, your equity over 4 years,
Yeah.
25% per year." And Amazon's like, "No, we're going to give you 5% that first year, then
Yeah.
15%, and if you stick it out till third year, then we're going to give you 40%, 40%." But
Yeah.
they know everybody's going to leave in that first year or two anyway. It's like, well, isn't that a signal that you should fix something so that they actually
I,
stick around? Like, you
I
know,
I don't know how Amazon even recruits people. Just go to any other fan company, they don't do that. It's just so weird.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty bizarre for sure. But and just thinking about that 60-hour process that you went through just to get a promotion, I put like 60 hours of prep into just studying for that Amazon interview. I didn't get the job, and I wasn't told why. It's like,
Hmm.
and they're like, oh, but keep an eye on our website and like apply for other jobs. I'm like, why? If you're not going to tell me what I'm not doing well, why would I go through all of that again, put that much kind of time and effort into reapplying if you're not going to tell me what I did wrong? Like, I'm not going to improve, you
Yep.
know? And
Yep.
yeah, I agree. Like, if you leave the company for that, I kind of think of like, here's company A and company B, and you go and you get that better job at company B, and then you can come back to company A for like another raise and title bump and stuff later on. But it's kind of ridiculous. By the way, to all the newcomers, welcome to the Tech Interview Guide, where we rant and rave endlessly about interview processes and why they're horrible. I've been in the industry for 25, 20, almost 26 years now, and I'm just here to help people out and give perspectives and things like that. And tonight we got Mike Chen on the stream, and we're just chatting about kind of Mike's journey into tech and kind of bouncing questions off Mike. Just to get his thoughts and perspectives on interview process and things like that. So we appreciate all the new follows and everybody dropping by tonight. Um, RC Maniac left a comment, said, my last company happened to make conference software. Some people ended up getting poached by Zoom. They kept poaching people from my company. During an all hands, someone asked if we could set up a non compete. The CEO said it's illegal in a number of locations, and that is in California. And also said, if we're not good enough for someone to stay, that's on us. It's our fault for not being good enough, and we need to improve on that. That's blatant, like,
That's
transparency right there. I love it. A
mature.
non a
Yeah.
non compete just creates animosity. Yeah, I agree. When I was at SendGrid, we had a bunch of people from a very sports oriented company. Um, I probably shouldn't name them on the stream. Um, let's just say they were very active. Um, but we had a bunch of salespeople like apply at SendGrid, and we ended up hiring them as well as engineers. And we actually got a cease and desist letter from the company saying, please stop poaching our employees. And we wrote them back on, we haven't poached a single employee. They're coming to us. Like, we can prove they came through our process that nobody in the company has poached an employee. And they kept coming over in droves. I think we hired probably 15 to 20 people just from that company. And when we got the second cease and desist letter saying, we're begging you, please stop hiring our best employees, like, all right. But then it felt like a weird discrimination of like, nah, we can't even interview you because you happen to work at that company. I know you want to come over here and work with all your friends that just left, but we can't hire you because we promised this company we wouldn't. But yeah, non-competes are illegal, especially in California, and other places as well. But it's
It's
pretty
just
wild for sure.
crazy. It's crazy to me that companies use the term poach as if
Yeah,
like you own the employees. It's like that. I think just
right.
even that terminology is so toxic. It's just like I can't stand that term. It's just like it's a very like anytime we kind of like get into like company loyalty and like family and all that like other like I honestly think it's gaslighting.
Yeah,
Um, is like I get really annoyed by companies who like employ that kind of rhetoric to like prove like some kind of ownership claim over their employees.
right.
It really drives me insane.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Rasma, thanks for the follow. Appreciate you dropping by as well. Give you some blinky lights. Yeah, if you've got questions for me or Mike about like interview prep, career prep, anything like that, we're here to help you out. So if you've got questions, please continue to drop those in chat. I dropped Mike's links in chat as well. You can follow Mike as generic Mike Chen on Twitch and Twitter. He's really active on Twitter. He's got a LinkedIn account, but we decided we weren't going to share that because he's not as active on LinkedIn. But super, super active on Twitter, especially with Twitter Spaces and helping people out there and just sharing a lot of perspective as well. And so I've gotten to know Mike, I think through Twitter, right? Did we? I think we met through Twitter.
That's right.
And I came and hung out on your stream just as a listener. And Mike actually does like front end development tech challenges. He'll have people like come by his stream and like give him a tech challenge to do, and he'll like actually work through that challenge himself. And I always appreciated that. And so I reached out to Mike on Twitter. I'm like, I love that you're being vulnerable like that. Like I haven't got the guts to do that myself, partly because I was interviewing at the time, and I'm like, oh, I don't want like a potential company to come by and see me flounder and be like, ah, forget hiring this guy. Maybe now that I'm deciding between a couple of offers, I can get back into doing some of that. But yeah, I always appreciate people that are willing to be vulnerable and just show what they're learning and how they work through things. But I think it's also really important. This is something that I mentioned to Mike on Twitter, just when we were kind of private messaging back and forth. Is I love that you're willing to be vulnerable, but I love that you're showing other people a process that they can follow. Yeah. And I think that that's what a lot of like boot camps and schools are not teaching. They're like, oh, just go, find that book, Crack the Coding Interview, or Grokking the Coding Interview, or all the algorithm books, but they don't tell you the process to follow of like repeat the problem, ask me questions, write out some design or some pseudocode, and then ask their opinion and then get started on the real thing. Like I did a mock interview earlier today where I presented the problem to the person, and they're like, okay, got it. Let me talk through a little bit about what I'm going to do. I'm like, oh, cool. They're going to like talk through their design. And no, they started writing code, and they were just like, monologuing. It's like, okay, well, now I'm going to loop over this array. I'm like, yeah, I can see you do that. You don't have to tell me what you're doing. Like, tell me why you're doing that. Like, that's what I want to hear as an interviewer. I want to know why you're making the decisions you are. Like, how are you thinking ahead on this design? And so, Mike, I really appreciate that you do this on your stream and you show people what that process is. I think that that's one of the most important things about helping people out in this kind of stuff is just being that example. And so when I saw all this going on, I'm like, I got to have Mike on my stream. I can't not have Mike on my stream. This is going to be great. To everybody else, Fierce Docker, good to see you in chat as well. Keep dropping those questions in. We'll definitely address those kind of as we go. Fierce Docker asks, I'm struggling to find an entry-level job. Should I hire a recruiter to help? Good question. Next Thursday, we're actually going to have a recruiter on the show. And I dropped, if you follow me on Twitter, it's the same username on Twitch and LinkedIn that I use on Twitter. It's just Ian Douglas 736. I tweeted a Google survey today for like an Ask Me Anything. So if you want to ask a recruiter anything at all, fill out that Google form. Everything's anonymous. I don't collect your email or your name or anything. It's literally just give me the question. And we're going to ask this recruiter all these questions, or as many as we can get through next week when we have Alex on the show. So tune in next Thursday for sure. We'll have a recruiter there. Mike, what do you think about hiring a recruiter? There are different kinds of recruiters for sure, but like to get that entry-level job, do you think recruiters are helpful?
I think they could be. I think they might get you a little bit more volume in terms of like companies that you might be able to interview at. To be honest, I only tried using a recruiter one time in my career. It's like pretty early on in my career, and then afterwards, people just reached out to me on LinkedIn. So I didn't really need to do that later on in my career. So I feel like these recruiters tend to work with more like junior mid-level engineers. And just real quick, by the way, I think we missed a question from Jazz Code, so maybe we can go back to that a little bit later.
Oh yeah.
What are some good questions to ask companies when you're interviewing?
Oh yeah.
So we should come back to that.
Thanks, Jazz.
Just thinking through my experience. So I actually used a recruiter for this past headcount that I filled. And I found it to be a pretty good experience from a hiring manager's point of view. And so I would say that, like, personally, the way that I would think about this. So there's two models for recruitment, and I assume you're talking about like a third party recruiter.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is someone who works as a recruiter for a recruiting firm, not someone who's like the Google in-house recruiter that's recruiting for
Correct.
Google, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
So there's two different models for this. So one is the retained model and one's the contingent model. So the contingent model is like literally they just want to put butts in seats at the companies, and they get a commission based on your salary. The retained model is the company pays. And by the way, you're not really hiring a recruiter.
Yeah.
The company will like actually if you Ian, do you know if like there's ones where they charge a candidate? I think that should never happen. If that's
Um.
happening, that's bad, probably.
No. Well, I hesitate to say no as a blanket statement. There are companies where like they'll get the commission from the company, even if you're like hiring them. Sometimes you pay them a percentage if they negotiate something higher, then you give them
Uh
a
huh.
percentage of
Gotcha.
the renegotiation. I have seen that where like if they offer you say 100K and they negotiate for 125K, then they get a portion of that extra $25,000 that you got. So they're not getting a percentage of the total salary. They'll typically get like a what they call like a finder's fee or like that
Hmm.
commission from the target company. They'll get paid by them, but then if they turn around and negotiate on your behalf, you pay them the difference, or like some percentage of that difference. It's not as common though. I'm not a fan. Like I would not hire a recruiter where I have to pay the recruiter money. Um,
Yes.
that's not. I don't think that's a wise use of your money. I think recruiters they already make their commission. Like they're going to make 15 to 20% of your annual salary. That's pretty typical. Some are a little bit higher if they're like getting into executive type of roles, but 15 to 20% is their typical commission. And that's also why a lot of agency recruiters tend not to work with entry level devs because your entry level salary is a lot lower. And so their return on
Hmm.
the time investment is a lot lower than if they go after all the senior devs. And that's the unfortunate thing there is they're more likely to help a senior dev or intermediate dev because that salary is going to be way higher. But I think now that we're seeing a lot of these salary bumps anyway, I'm wondering how much of that's actually going to change over the next year. We're starting to see these 20, 30, 40% lifts in salary. I have a feeling that recruiters are going to be okay again with helping entry level devs out if they're going to be getting 100, 120, 140K jobs as that first job. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on
It's
all that?
Well, it's interesting because, like, I think if you're pretty experienced, you don't really need a recruiter. So I think
Mhm.
I feel like, this is just might be my narrow perspective. I have a very narrow perspective of like someone who I think I basically won the lottery. Like, I think, in terms of like career, I'd never pawn my experience and my career trajectory off as like this is because I'm good at engineering. I think I'm pretty good at engineering, but I also know that there's so much luck involved, and I think it's just important to acknowledge it and like the amount of privilege that's
Mhm.
there. Um, and so I have a narrow perspective of like I am someone who happened to get noticed, coming out of like my second job, to start getting into like Silicon Valley companies and stuff like that. So I never really had to go down that path of like let's find a recruiter for my third job. I was looking for a recruiter for my second job, and like from my understanding, and this is like typical where I was working with this recruiting firm most recently. It was mostly like junior to mid level and like very few senior and engineer candidates. So yeah, I don't know like uh, why senior engineers would like need a recruiter. Like finding the companies that pay the really good salaries that they might be qualified for, it just seems unlikely to me that a senior engineer would really need that.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I think early in your career, a recruiter can be helpful if you can find a recruiter willing to help an entry level dev.
Yeah.
Recruiters can be extremely helpful, if for nothing else than just to give you advice on things to try. Even
Yeah.
if they don't have a pool of roles for entry level devs, they can at least give you advice. And Alex, that we're gonna have on the stream next week, he works with bootcamp grads. He's been a recruiter, like an agency recruiter. So, like the kind of like what we would call headhunters, basically, which is not a great term, but it's effectively like they're being they see job posts, they try to find a candidate and they try to present that candidate to the company. And so they're not always asked by the company to do it. Sometimes they're just like shooting your resume out everywhere, hoping that they get a bite. Um, but Alex does his a little bit differently. And so I'm excited to kind of get his take. But there are recruiters out there who, at the very least, will give you advice on things to try. Mike,
Yeah.
do you know Taylor Dessen? Dason?
Yeah,
Not sure how to pronounce his
I
last name.
follow him on Twitter. I don't know him personally, but I think
Yeah.
he gives pretty good advice from what I've read.
Yeah, and so he works at a company called Vaco, and he basically live streams just about every morning, Monday to Friday, on LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
you can find his stuff. And he's always got like a hiring manager, an engineering manager, an HR, like someone. And he's an agency recruiter himself, but he's super helpful in the kinds of topics that he presents every day to talk about. Like, hey, try this. Here's some things to do. He's also really active on Twitter, and so a lot of the same things that he posts on LinkedIn, he posts on Twitter as well. And so he'd be someone really helpful. I'll go find the link for him in a minute. And so I kind of mentioned to Fearstalker in chat, like I want to sit down and I want to work out like a flow chart of like if this is where you're getting in the process and then like you're kind of getting
Yeah.
dropped, here's what you can try. I would love to put something together and just kind of collect ideas from other people. Tech Rally, thanks for the follow, appreciate that. Um,
Hey,
is
Terry.
is is to think about like if you're applying for the job and you're not getting a phone call, we can talk about that. If you're getting the phone call and you're not like you don't make it past that first screening phone call, we can work on that. If you get through that screening call and you get to the tech screening call and you don't make it through that, we can talk about that. But it's all different things at different stages along the way. And so I actually want to put like a flow chart together or something where I can say like, if you get this far and you're stuck on something to do, like here's a link and go over to techinterview.guide and like give you some material or something like that. So yeah, it's something I'm probably going to work on next week because I've had enough people like asking like I'm dropping off at this point. What do I do? And I feel like I'm repeating that content over
Yep.
and over again, to the point where it's like, okay, well
Yep.
now it's time to go put it on the website and just point people to that. So that's something that I want to do next week in between jobs. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Just wrapping up the recruiter
Mhm.
conversation. I used it, yeah, like I said, very early on in my career, I used a recruiter. Found it to be a total waste of time,
Mhm.
as a candidate. They were like, "What are your salary requirements?" And I told them, I think I was looking for like an 85,000 job. And they kept finding me jobs that were like offering like 50,
Mhm.
60K. I'm like, they can't even get this one thing right. um,
Yeah.
and yeah, like I don't know what they're hoping for. Like maybe they were hoping that like I would get through the whole interview process and be like, oh well, now I'm gonna like now I'm too tired to do another one, and like I'm just gonna accept this thing. And I eventually ended up getting a job through a referral rather than rather than through a recruiter. So that was my experience with it, and I think a lot of candidates have similar experiences. And then one more note on like kind of the payment model. So I think the like I was saying, there's some recruitment agencies that are retained, and there's some that are contingent. And so contingent's like if you fill it with any candidate, like, and you can like hire a bunch of like recruiting firms that are all contingent, and the first one to fill the seat wins. Like, and
Yeah.
they get the the commission. But with retained, you pay the company upfront. And in my experience with as a company side of things, that incentive is aligned with me
Mm.
because like I am able to understand that this recruitment firm wants to do the best job. They want to find me the best candidate, the right fit. And so I find that like just my brief experience with it, it feels like that is the correct model
Yeah.
for the incentives are like the correct way there. So I would say again, narrow perspective, but if you were to find a recruiter, you should find one that is paid on a retained basis.
Yep, for sure. Cool. Well, let's rewind and get back to Jazz's question. They were asking, what questions do I ask at an interview? That's a fantastic topic that I would love to go into. So, as part of my own interview process, where I've been kind of audio recording my own things, I always love to go into an interview where I am armed with like a bunch of questions, and sometimes questions come up while we're talking. But I usually walk in. I join Zoom calls and stuff, um, with usually at least 3 or 4 questions already prepared for that specific interviewer. And I always reach out to HR and be like, hey, can you tell me who I'm interviewing with? And I go look them up on LinkedIn and I find like their work history. How long have they been at this company? Where did they work before that? What kind of technical background do they have? Part of it is to prepare me a little bit of how technical can I talk to them? Because I'm such a firm believer in sort of speaking to the audience at their level. So if I know,
Yep.
like if I'm interviewing with Mike and Mike's in marketing, it's like, okay, well, but does Mike have a technical background? Or is Mike just, got like marketing background? They happen to work at a tech company, and I might kind of feel out a little like I'm probably going to start with really high level terminology and like gradually get down into technology. And as soon as I see Mike's eyes glaze over, it's like, okay, I've gone too deep on the techno babble, and I need to like bring it back up to like everyday language. And I think that that's an important thing to talk about with interviews is you have to speak to your audience. Um, and so I always ask HR like, who am I interviewing with? Like, give me their names because I want to look them up. And I go in with questions specifically for them. So I want to give just a really generic kind of thing. But part of audio recording these is I actually want to go back and find all the questions that I asked them where I got a response of, oh, that's a good question. Because it happens a lot. Because I go in with such really good questions. And so here's how I think about it. Early on in the process, so you're going to start with like a recruiter phone screen of some kind, and then you're going to go on to like a technical phone screen, maybe a take-home challenge, and then you're going to get into like technical interviews, and then you're going to like follow up on culture and probably talk to recruiters about benefits and things like that. And so throughout that whole process, you want to have different questions for each stage. And I would say the earlier the stage, the fewer the questions you'll ask. Later in the stage, like as you're getting through their process, you're going to ask more questions and they're going to be deeper questions. And so on that first initial recruiter call, when they would say like, hey, do you have any questions for me? I would, if they didn't already bring it up, I would ask them, what's the salary band for this role? And just leave it at that. I don't ask about benefits. I don't ask about perks. I don't ask about total comp or equity or anything like that. I just straight up ask like, what's the salary band? And sometimes they're willing to talk about it kind of ahead of time and just like say like, hey, this is the company, this is the role, etc., this is what we're offering, does that sound okay? In that case, if they already, or once we get the salary one out of the way, then I'm probably going to ask, can you tell me what the interview process is like? And really break that down into detail. Like, how many different sessions am I going to be in? How long are they going to be? What's expected of me as a candidate? What should I prepare ahead of time? And sometimes they've got bundles already published and ready to go. Like, all the FANG companies are great about that. They're like, oh yeah, we'll send you all kinds of content of what to study and so on. Going back to your story about Yahoo, I've mentioned on the stream in the past that I interviewed at Yahoo back in the day. And the recruiter told me to study design patterns. I'm like, yeah, no problem. So I buy a book on design patterns and I'm flying up to Northern California, reading this book, like trying to absorb everything in this book. And I get there and I crush the technical side of things. But then it comes to like the culture questions and they start asking me about football. And they're like, who won the last, Heisman Trophy, and who won the last Super Bowl, and who are your 3 favorite quarterbacks, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't have a lot of interest in football. And they're like, you're interviewing with the fantasy football team here at Google or at Yahoo, right? And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, the recruiter told me to study design patterns, not football stats. Like I would have studied football stats instead. And so yeah, I didn't get the job. I wasn't a culture fit. Even though
sounds like you dodged a bullet.
Maybe. But I mean, at the same time, I'm like, well, I'm from Canada. We have the CFL. Our field is narrower. It's 110 yards long, and we only get 3 downs instead of 4. And we have the Grey Cup, not the Super Bowl. They're like, we don't care. And I'm like, well, then ask me anything about hockey. Insane. And they're like, we still don't care. So yeah. So the recruiter call, I would have just a couple of quick questions of what's the process, what should I study. Once you start getting into the technical screens, I would start asking a little bit more about like, what can I expect about the technical challenge? What kinds of topics should I study? Again, you want to ask like for deeper detail. As you progress through that, you want to ask more questions. Like as you're interviewing with the actual engineers on the team, if it's an engineering role, ask them like, hey, can you describe like what it's like from, taking a ticket or a task or something on your Jira board or Agile board, whatever, and getting it all the way deployed. like, just can you walk me through just at a high level, not, don't, divulge any secrets or anything, but like, can you describe that at a high level? And then I would ask them, like, what do you like about that process? What don't you like about that process? Is there something about that that you could change? And if you haven't changed it, why not? Is it something where the whole team has to decide on that change? Like, what would that look like? I also ask engineers and managers the same questions, like, why is this role open? That's a good one to ask. And sometimes they'll tell you. Sometimes it's like, oh, we had someone leave and you're backfilling, or it's like, oh, we're just growing the team and you're going to join the team. But you can also ask, like, are there certain projects coming up? Like, are there certain skills I should have? But I ask questions of the engineers and the managers, like, how often do you meet? Like, how often do you do a one-on-one with your manager? And then I ask the manager, how often do you do your one-on-ones with your team? Because I'm checking to see if there's a disconnect there. If the engineers are like, we meet like every month, every other month, and the manager's like, oh, we meet like every week. It's like, well, clearly there's a communication problem going on. So sometimes you can kind of like suss that stuff out. I also really like to ask everybody, after the recruiter stage, I ask everybody that I meet with, what do you hope to find in your next teammate? And it's really surprising the answers that you get where, like the engineer on the team, they're like, oh, well, I hope someone comes in and they've got like a background in such and such, and it has nothing to do with the job description. Or they're like, oh yeah, we're looking for someone that we get along with really well. It's like, oh, maybe the last person that left was kind of a jerk. And so you can start to like kind of read between the lines on some of that. And so I like asking that question to everybody else on the interview, is like, what do you hope to find in your next teammate? But yeah, I actually want to go back through all my recordings. I've got a thing on my to-do list. I want to go back. I want to find all those questions that I asked and just do like a blog post, or I'll put it up on Tech Interview Guide of these are the questions that I've asked in my own job hunt, recently, where I got like a, wow, that's a good question. Sometimes the interviewer doesn't respond with that, but you can tell that you caught them off guard, where it's like, oh, if you can make them think about an answer, then you really stand out as a candidate of like, wow, you really came prepared for this. Mike, what would you say, as a candidate and as a hiring manager, what are some questions that you've asked, and what are some questions that you've been really surprised to be asked from a candidate?
Yeah, as a hiring manager, it's hard for me to say I've been really surprised by any questions. I feel like I do a lot of research on this topic. I think, like, honestly, the asking good questions is, I think it's a subtle signal that you are qualified and competent and like passionate about the job. I think for many big companies, you are not allowed to list it as like a criteria for like why we should or shouldn't hire this person. You're not allowed to officially do that. And so, or not, I don't think that you're prohibited, but like it's when we go through the interview process, there's like a checklist of like, here are the actual criteria we're evaluating for. And the quality of questions is never on there. It's just not one of the criteria.
Sure.
However, your interviewers are human, and they will be swayed by how much they like you, how much they like your questions, how much they think you're interested in the job, right, and how passionate you are. So yes, I think like a lot of what you should do should be framed around hinting that you are interested. Like obviously, there's like the question, like there's an actual information gathering aspect for you, and so ask those questions that are like going to be relevant to you and like going to help you make a decision about this company, but also like drop hints that you know what you're talking about. Yeah, like you mentioned you're talking about like marketing, talk about like performance marketing, like talk about their analytics and how like ask about their analytics situation and like what can an engineer make their job easier, like what do you wish was happening on the technical side to make their job easier, right? So that's like a marketer. But like a designer, like talk about the process that occurs between like handoff between the engineer and designer. How could it be better? How could it be worse? Also, my like videos coming in and out, is that something that is
I figured out how to control that on my side. So yeah, it's happened a couple times. I've got a refresh button here that I can hit. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So like collaboration, like just figuring out like how you can say that this is something you're interested in, you want to make the process better, you want to make these people like you, essentially.
Right.
Um, and then yeah, from the engineering side, I think your questions are really good. Like just asking about like why did this person leave? Like what's kind of the process for like merging in code, deploying. You know,
Hmm.
those are kind of the things that you don't really get from the job description.
Right.
What's a typical day like in the life of a company of an engineer at this company? What would my typical day be like?
Yeah.
As in like how would you assign someone to train me during my first 30 days? You know,
Right.
like try to
For
get the
sure.
answer to that
What's
question.
the
If
onboarding like?
they
Yeah.
Yes, the onboarding. Yes, if they don't have a good answer, that means their onboarding sucks, like invariably. So
Right.
that's something you have to kind of keep in mind. Is like, would you be able to thrive in that environment? So,
Mm.
yeah, I think beyond that, I would ask about like what is like one technical challenge that your team is facing that I could maybe come in and help with. And so these are like maybe like more experienced questions. So I think
Right.
like I would over index on trying to dig out like how they train people, how they mentor, like what is that culture like. If they don't have like really well prepared answers, you might be in for kind of a rough ride, and
Yeah,
that's
for
something
sure.
you have to decide whether you're interested in. The last question I would say that I think maybe sometimes takes people off guard is like, how do you deal with it when people make mistakes here?
Mm.
Because that is
That's a good one. Yep.
yeah, like you should never punish people, in my opinion, for making a mistake at a tech company, or any company, in my opinion. Like I think if it's due to like gross negligence, maybe, but in most cases, it's like this person did something that they weren't supposed to do because it was a little bit too easy to do it that way.
Right.
And you want to make the doing the right thing easy and doing the wrong thing hard. And this person did the wrong thing because it was easy, and
Yeah.
that's
Good
your
point.
fault as a company. So
That's good.
um yeah, if the company can't like fess up to that, if they don't understand that, if they don't show that they understand that during the question and answer process, um could be in for a rough ride. That's like kind of the like maybe still join them, but could be in for a rough ride.
Yeah. I like to ask questions too of managers, for example. How often can I check in with you for that first like 30 days, 60 days, just to make sure that I'm on track, that I'm meeting your expectations and so on. I think that those are really good things to kind of talk about as well. Not that I want to check in and make sure that, you're giving me a pat on the back and I'm not going to hit you up for a raise in 2 months or anything like that. But it's just like, I want to know that I'm meeting your expectations. What is that process going to look like? And then also ask both the engineers and the manager as well. Like Mike touched on this a little bit, but like, what's the mentorship process going to be, especially for an entry level role? You need to have people that you can ask questions of, with very little notice. Of just like, hey, Mike, can I come bug you about this or that? Like, do you have like a dedicated person? I know of companies where like your first 30 days, every single thing you do is pair programming, where
Yeah.
you've got like someone that's been at the company a long time and they are your buddy and they get assigned to you basically. So hopefully you get along. And that person may actually be part of the interview process to find out like, do I think I could work side by side with this person for the first month because I'm going to be their sort of quote unquote buddy. Um, I know of companies that do that, and I think it's a fantastic strategy of I'm going to teach you absolutely everything I do. I'm going to show you all of my processes. I'm going to show you all my shortcuts. You're going to see where I struggle. And if you know something to help me with where I struggle, that's great too. We can like learn from each other and build each other up because that's what it's going to be like day to day. But I think especially for entry level dev, the last thing you want to do is go work at a company where they like throw you in the deep end of the pool and they're like, good luck,
Yeah.
see you in a couple of weeks when
Yep.
we do that sprint check in. Make sure you got your work done. Is like, what's their onboarding like? What's their documentation like? What sort of struggles do new developers on the team have? Like, how have they polished that and refined that over time? Like, how can I give you feedback on that onboarding process? You might have an onboarding process, but what if it sucks? How do I give
Yeah.
you that feedback? And so I think that these are all like really good things to kind of work out. But again, I think these are questions that you want to save toward the end of the process because you don't want to walk in and sound like you're asking questions about being critical about their process or things like that. I think that those questions can wait until later in the process towards like getting that offer. Um, And so I would reserve some of those questions for later. And so I would start with fewer questions and more high level questions, and then as you get progress through the process, ask deeper, more important questions to find out, am I really going to like working here? And then typically towards the end, recruiters will reach out and be like, all right, well, let's chat about benefits and let's chat about perks. And, that's where they kind of put the sell on of like, hey, you should really come work here. And then, you can start talking about salary and things like that. And if they make an offer, you always want to make sure to say, like, how does that sound? You never want to say, like, yes, I'll absolutely take the job. You want to make it sound like it sounds really good. Let's get it in writing so I can kind of look through everything and I'll get back to you. You want to make it sound like you're bought in on the role, but until you get it in writing, like you'll give them like a verbal like, yeah, maybe, where it's contingent on looking through the written offer, because verbal means nothing until it's on paper and until there's an actual signature. They could promise you one thing and you give them like an agreement on that. It's like, okay, well, now we'll put the paperwork together, and then you sign that paperwork, and that paperwork is the final thing. And so you always want to make sure that what they verbally tell you and what actually gets written in that written contract match. Some of the job offers I've gotten over the past week didn't match. The title was wrong, or it's like, oh, that wasn't the salary you said I was going to get. You said this. And like just following up with recruiters on that kind of stuff. And then once you get it in writing, then you can negotiate because you've got something in writing to start with. And so, I had like one of the offers that I got recently. They're like, verbally, like, this is what we want to bring you in at. This is the equity and all that. How does that sound? How do we compare with the other offers that you have? They're really trying to gauge, like, are we wasting our time here? Are you like actually seriously considering taking our offer? And I've had that conversation now with 4 recruiters over the past week of like, are you really going to take this job? Like, if we make an offer, like, is this like a real thing or are we wasting our time here? And I always make it sound like, oh yeah, I'm totally in. Like, you're my top choice. Because you don't want them to say like, never mind. Because you really need them to believe you absolutely want that job. Otherwise, the negotiation is going to fall apart. If they can't trust that you're serious about taking their job, they're not going to bother negotiating. And thankfully I narrowed it down to 2 jobs, and so I'm like kind of going back and forth a little bit on them, and hope to make a decision maybe tomorrow. So we'll see.
Yeah, I hate when companies do that. By the way, I'm like,
right, yeah,
just
for sure.
print the freaking PDF out and send it to me. Like, don't like dangle it in front of me. Like, I cannot see. Like, I've had that happen to me a couple times of like, you need to be ready to accept this if you're gonna send it to you. I'm like, just send me the offer, or like, or we're done here. It's like, just it's so annoying that they do that. And like, I'm a visual person. I like reading the details, and I like seeing them on paper and showing them to my wife, who is a sorry, I don't know what's going on my camera.
Yeah, I'm
and showing them to my wife. And showing them to my wife, who is like a part of my decision making for that's my business.
Sure.
And it's like, I don't know why companies do that. It's just like, I think they have like some like acceptance numbers that they're trying to hit or something like that. It's really annoying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, their recruiters are they've got goals to meet too. Like, how quickly can we get a butt in that chair,
exactly.
Virtually nowadays. But yeah.
It just ends up being really hostile to the candidate, and like, I remember like I went through a company's process like this. It was a huge turnoff,
right?
And I almost walked because of that. So
yeah, for sure. Worst Dodo asked in chat, how do I join Peloton? I need to get an offer fast to take advantage of the cheap RSUs. Yeah, their stock dipped 25% or something today, because someone leaked a memo that they're going to stop making their bikes because they kind of saturated the market, and there's other choices and stuff out there, so their stock took a dip. And that's the kind of stuff, like, you do not want to find out, that, or you don't want upper management to find out you were the one that leaked that thing, because like, you'll be out in a hurry, and you're gonna get seriously blacklisted from a lot of things. So yeah, just don't leak stuff.
Quick note on like what questions to ask a company.
Yeah.
I ask pretty early on if I'm joining a startup. I ask how much money they have left, or like how much runway they have left. How long until the company runs out of money,
especially for startups.
What are their plans for fundraising?
Yep.
You really don't want to join a company that's like on the verge of bankruptcy, and yeah, like you don't want to be in for that instability. And honestly, my opinion is, and this might be like, so a lot of what I say here around like toxic companies is like it might just be something for later in your career.
Mm.
Ideally, yes, you would say be able to reject whatever offers like for a company that spooks you, but like if you're just trying to get your first job, you might have to just take what you can get. But
Take what you can get.
I
Yeah,
will
I
say
agree.
that a company that will not tell you how much runway they have, that's really bad. Like I think
Yeah,
that's they're like companies should be transparent about this. And if they won't tell you, that's not like, it sounds like an awkward and sensitive question. It is a very normal thing for you like that you should be able to ask a company. So
yeah, for sure.
that's an important one that I feel for startups.
Yep, I agree. Ask them how much runway they have, and then when they start talking about equity, you can ask them like, "What's the exit plan? Like, are you looking to
Yep.
go public? Are you looking
Yep.
to get bought? Like, what's this equity going to be worth in the future? Because yeah, you claim your equity is worth such and such right now with a strike price based on the valuation of the company. At the end of the day, though, it's monopoly money. Like, it's
Yep.
fake money. It's I was gonna say it's
Yeah.
almost Bitcoin. It's basically it's fake currency, but you
Yep.
can use that as a negotiation tactic. Like the offer that I'm probably gonna take. I basically said like, look, I'm looking to stay at my next career a long time. I want to invest in the company. I want to be able to buy the equity. Can we do something about the equity grant? And they're like, yeah, well, how's 40% more equity sound? I'm like, that
Hmm.
sounds great. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that plays out. But
40 traditional monopoly money.
yeah, yeah,
Can't say no to that.
it's
I
still
did
it's still
see,
40% more monopoly money, but it could
yes,
be worth and
could be
and the
worth a lot.
company's talking IPO already, so could be
Yep.
lucrative, could be a good time to get in.
The the company will almost always lie to you about like if they're like, oh, we're gonna go public. I've never been at a company they're like, oh, we're gonna go public, but it's gonna be in 6 years.
Yeah,
They never say that. They always 2 years. Like, and so if you hear 2 years, that's like kind of the standard answer. We're looking to go public 2 years from now.
yeah,
That's pretty
yeah, yeah.
standard answer. Like I was at a company that was like a rolling 2 year company, like a rolling 2 year window. They're like
Yeah,
every
for
year it
sure.
was like it's good 2 years out.
It's gonna be another 2 years.
And so don't count on anything they say
Right.
about like their exit plan. It's almost always going to take longer than you think. Um, and
But
I
to know
saw
that they have a plan, that's the thing. Like,
yes,
have you
that's
even
better.
thought
That's
about
better.
what the exit's going to be?
Yeah,
Because yeah, it's almost never going to work out the way they hope or when they
yeah,
hope, unless they know like, yes, we've actually started the paperwork. We're going to be going IPO in like 8 months or 10 months or something. It's like, okay, you've definitely got a plan. You've been filing that paperwork, and you can kind of watch, the fundraises that they do, and once they kind of hit Series C, Series D, they're probably going to go public because they got to pay back all those investors. So they got to do something for them.
yeah.
It's not a
Yep.
guarantee they'll go public, and if they go public, it's still not a guarantee they're going to succeed. So you still have a lot of options to weigh there. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick note on the I saw earlier in the chat you were talking like versus total comp. I think
Mm,
for sure for startups, salary is what is important. I
absolutely.
think for if it's a public company like a Fang and their stock is all public, you could sell it right away. I tend to think of the total comp as a more important number because
Okay.
if you could sell the stock right away, the stock is as good as cash.
Right.
And so that's something to keep in mind too. Like also for a lot of late stage startups, I think like the one counter example to this is WeWork, where like they were about to go public and their stock was about to be worth a lot of money, and it just turned into a debacle. But
Wow.
like for the most part, like every other company I feel that has been like Series F, G, H stage, that was doing well has gone public and at a pretty decent price. But that's
Hmm.
just like in the past couple of years. Don't this none of this is financial advice. All for entertainment.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting. Like thinking about the whole equity kind of game. Like I've done it at a bunch of companies. But I've also been at companies where I'm not buying that equity at all. Most of my career has been like pre-IPO
Hmm.
startups.
Yeah.
And there were some I'm just like, there's no way I'm giving you that money. Or I did for one company, and as soon as I handed them that check, I'm like, I'm never gonna see that money again.
Shouldn't
And
have done that.
I did. It actually like came back as a nice return, but as soon as I handed it over, I'm like, I'm never going to see that money again. But I'm usually very careful about who I invest in, and it was actually a running joke with my last employer. Is like, oh, if Ian buys his stock options, your company's going to go public and it's going to succeed, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so he was super excited when I quit the first time, because I
Yeah.
worked there twice and I quit twice. The first time I quit, I bought all of my options, and he got really excited. He's like, "You're buying your options?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "We made it." I'm like, "Yeah, all right, we'll see." And
Do
they
you
actually did a.
exercise the second time too?
No, I didn't stay long enough. I was only there like 5 months and
Hmm.
change. Yeah, the
Gotcha.
job just wasn't working out, so I left back in December. But yeah, moving on to the bigger and better for sure.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Well, we've been at it almost an hour and a half. Time flies when we're yakking and having fun here. Let's take a couple more questions from chat if you've got questions. I've been trying to pay attention to Facebook and LinkedIn. Haven't seen any questions come in there at all. Um, but yeah, if you're ever watching on those platforms, you can absolutely leave comments there. If you're watching this on YouTube later and you got this far, like and subscribe, drop comments there too, and I will get around to answering those. But yeah, if you've got other questions, please drop them in chat. We'll hang out for a couple more minutes, and then we'll start to kind of wind up. So Mike, if you've ever watched my stream when I have a guest, I like to end with rapid fire, just goofy,
Hmm.
silly questions. So be
Yeah.
prepared, and they will be on the
I'm ready.
caliber of like, is a hot dog a sandwich, and stuff like that. So we'll get those prepared. But if you're still hanging out in chat and you got any other questions, feel free to start dropping those in too.
I saw
Um,
Clarence had a question about whether it's rude to talk about startup stability. Like I said, I
mm,
think if your company thinks it's
right.
rude, then your company's bad.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's all good.
just the way that I think about this is like, what would a company be comfortable asking me? Like, would they be worried about my long-term longevity at this company? Yes. So I
Do you
should
have
be
any
worried
major
about
health
them,
problems
right?
that we should worry about,
Yeah, like
as we
of
hire
course,
you?
like
Yeah.
they can't ask a lot of these questions, but
Mhm.
like, like yeah, I think like in terms of just like, am I going to be able to stay at this company for like more than a
Right.
year? I think that's a pretty reasonable question to ask.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yep. So yeah, really appreciate all the other comments and folks that are like chiming in. RC Maniac, you're always great. Thank you for chiming in and helping folks out. Nikki T, good to see you, Nick. Hanging out in chat there too. Yeah, always appreciate when other folks are like willing to give their perspective and stuff on chat. So thank you for helping other folks out. Um, yeah, we'll hang out for a couple more minutes and see if any other questions drop in. Um, so what's kind of next for you at this company? So you're a small startup. Um, what's like, can you describe like what kind of tech stack you use, anything like that? Like, are you like fully cloud based? Are you serverless? Like, can you talk about any of that stuff?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. It's pretty like, so I basically inherited the majority of the tech stack. And after I got here, I rebuilt like 70% of the product.
Okay.
It was like a security Swiss cheese, essentially. um, so yeah, we had to like work on a lot of like kind of rewriting the API and the endpoints and stuff like that. So I brought over some of my favorite like technologies. So we were node based using Express.
Cool.
So I bolted on like Apollo server with GraphQL. And so we're already like TypeScript. So we use TypeScript and React on the front end. And we use uh, a GraphQL schema generator called Nexus
Okay.
that is not super popular, but I love it. It's like it's a code first GraphQL schema generator. So I super enjoy it. Like I think I'm surprised it's not gotten a little more traction in the space, but I'm a pretty big fan of the tech stack. As soon as I got here, I also like started testing a lot more heavily. Switched to from like a they had like a monthly deployment, like a monthly deployment train where they like put all their commits into like one gigantic branch and then like deployed it at the end of the month in the middle of the night. And so I immediately got off that into like continuous delivery, continuous integration, where we run end-to-end tests against like all our critical flows and push the code out in every single change. So, like development workflow wise, I'm pretty happy with it. But yeah, I think we're still pretty low traffic. So I don't need to worry too much about scaling yet, but that's probably going to be a thing that I'm going to be worrying about this coming year.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. All right, well, I haven't seen any new questions come in, so I think we'll jump into the funny stuff, and we'll kind of wind down from there, and then we'll see if we can find somebody to go raid. Looks like Chris Perillo's online. I actually convinced Chris Perillo to be on my stream in February. I'm gonna basically look at his LinkedIn and his resume and give him my thoughts and perspectives on what he could improve. So he's actually pretty excited about it. So
can you look at my resume and tell me what I can improve?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I come to the stream again. You can criticize my Also, Tech Rally's imploring me to do a plug. Do you do plugs before
Oh,
or
absolutely.
after the quick fire?
No, you can do them anytime. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, like I said, I do a front end interview mock stream, or like Ian said, I do a front end interview mock stream. So that's at twitch.tv/genericmikechen or mikechen.live. And I am building a front end practice question repository called frontendeval.com. We use that on the live stream, and so Tech Rally's been building that with me with another friend of mine. So
awesome.
Those are my 2 plugs. So thanks for encouraging. I was waiting Tech Rally for the time to plug. Okay, so I wasn't gonna forget, but the running joke is that I always forget to plug myself. Yeah, he's my head.
Tech Rally says he's your hype man. That's great. Yeah, definitely go check out Mike's channel. And Mike, yeah, if you ever want me to come on your stream, I'll chop apart your resume and give you all that feedback.
That sounds good.
For sure. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into some funny questions. What's invisible but you wish people could see?
Oxygen.
All right. What's the most ridiculous fact that you know?
I'm really bad at this.
That's all right.
I guess I can't. I'm blanking. I'm sorry. Oh,
all right.
It's dirty, but should I say it?
Yeah, go ahead. It's fine.
I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. It's fine.
Okay. Let's see. What part of a kids movie completely scarred you?
There was a part in Home Alone 2 where this is fresh in my mind because I watched it again recently. I was like, this part was really scary. But when he was wandering through the park in the middle of the night, and I feel like it was like very unhoused people's like phobic. Now I think it's a little politically incorrect, but it really scared me when I was back in the day.
Yeah, for me it was the original Willy Wonka with the boat in the tunnel with all the Gene Wilder stuff, chanting in the background. Yeah. What's the most embarrassing thing you've ever worn?
I used to breakdance in high school, and I wore these breakdancing pants that I think I wouldn't wear today. I usually like trained in them, and I did battles in them, but I typically wore jeans.
Yeah, great. You got a big patch of floor, behind you there. You care to demo and prove that?
No,
you can break.
I will literally die. Like I think I'll like break my neck.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. What used to be considered trashy but is now very classy?
In literal terms, lobster, I think. But like back in the day, it was like only poor people would eat it. But now it's like a delicacy.
Yeah.
But more recently, I can't think of an example. I guess like bell bottoms are back, but I don't know. I don't really keep up with these kinds of trends.
That's fair.
My entire wardrobe is probably like $300 at total.
Yeah. What would you say is the funniest corporate or business screw up that you've ever heard of?
The funniest corporate screw up?
Yeah.
The funniest?
Or just any that sort of come to mind.
These are really testing my recall. Like I definitely read, like I'm on Reddit a lot, so I read a lot of these things, but but I'm really bad at like recalling them.
One of my favorites
can you give me an example?
Yeah, like dig.com back in the day, they were worth like hundreds and hundreds
Yeah,
of
that's
millions of
right.
dollars, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna get bought, and it didn't work out, and they shrunk like crazy. Like they
Yep.
used to be the Reddit of the internet. They replaced like Slashdot, and it was like everything was about dig.com, and like within a year or something, they went from like triple digit millions to like barely double digit millions. And when
Yep.
we were at SendGrid, we picked up a whole data center of theirs for like pennies on the dollar. And we got like 700 servers out of it. We were doing all on-prem at the time, all on-premise like server racks and the whole bit. We got like 700 servers for almost nothing. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was really
They
disappointing. They thought they were worth all this money, and then it fell apart like almost overnight.
It was like this one rebrand. They rebranded
Hmm.
and then like it completely tanked their entire company.
That's what it was.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a
They
pretty
they they
pretty
were
bad
they were
corporate
coming up
F.
with a new version, and they're like, oh, this next version is gonna like completely blow everybody away, and they released it, and everybody hated it, and they fled.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
I talked about it during the interview, but WeWork is I think a great corporate gaffe
Oh yeah, it's a
because
good one.
all they needed to do was like release their S1 when they filed for to go public, and it was so like cult based
Yeah,
that they like lost all their value.
yep,
Like it was
for
like
sure.
just it was so centered around Adam Newman and his personality that like investors just like got out of it.
Yep, for sure. Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Mike, really appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight and kind of sharing your perspectives on things and helping with questions in chat about like, using recruiters and questions to ask during interviews and stuff like that. It's always great just having other perspectives and stuff on the stream. So you're welcome back anytime. Please come back and join us again.
Of
Meanwhile,
course.
go follow Mike. He's on the Twitters and he's on Twitch as generic Mike Chen. Go give him a follow. Go hang out in his Twitter Spaces and emoji away on all the things over there. There's no way to leave like comments and really troll you on Twitter Spaces at all, but we can certainly drop by your live stream next week and see what you're up to. So
Yeah. Awesome.
cool,
Yeah,
cool.
thanks for having me. Really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
for sure. All right. Well, thanks
All
everyone.
right.
Let's go find somebody. Yeah, Chris is still streaming, so I think we'll go raid Chris Perillo, and we'll catch everybody on Sunday. Sunday is just going to be Q&A. Next Thursday, we're going to have Alex, my recruiter friend. He's going to come by, and then the Thursday after that. Well, actually, I've got like the next several Fridays booked out after that. I think the one after that, I'm gonna have a panel of people, and the only topic is why aren't companies hiring junior devs? So that's going to be February 3rd, I believe. February 10th, we're going to have Chris Perillo on here, and we're going to set up some way of like me screening his resume and his LinkedIn. It should be pretty hilarious. I don't know if he'll stay for like a full hour, hour and a half, but I'm sure we'll find things to nerd out about. He did tons and tons of like tech news and tech culture stuff back in the day, like news broadcast kind of stuff. So he's a lot of fun. So we're going to go raid him right now. I'm just going to get that set up, and we will catch everybody on Sunday. And stay safe, stay warm, and we will catch everybody in a couple of days. All right. Have a good night, everyone.